What I wanted to try and talk about today, Paul, and help people understand is essentially what a data room is. That might sound a bit boring and a bit technical, but as always, let me try and put some context into it. The reason I say this is every time we get into this level of detail with a client, and very often it's actually around due diligence as part potentially of a sale or investment, the concept of the data room and the technicalities of the formation of it, but what should go inside it, create, I think, more angst and delays and problems than it really should. And I've seen, therefore, the data room be an obstacle. So what I want to try and do is remove the thought of it being an obstacle and maybe turn it into how do you, as the business owner, make it an opportunity for yourself. There's two things there. One obviously is governance, and again, just good governance is good governance, but also the opportunity to go through, maybe get you to review commercials, a number of bits and pieces. So I wanted to talk about why we have a data room, what's in a data room, and then specifically the kind of services that MAP offer around supporting helping a client or anybody else build a data room. So I suppose first question to you is, what is the role of a data room from your perspective?
Usually it's associated with some sort of transaction for the business. So there's an interested party who wants to get under the bonnet and understand the ins and outs of the business. So usually this is post offer, although you could have two levels of data room. Sometimes you would have, a more informal one that gives some basic information that allows somebody to formulate an offer. But then post offer and, initial acceptance, following a heads of term, usually you effectively be giving someone the keys to your business. And the way that manifests is a data room, which basically means all of your data and information across the business, where a buyer is looking at it through a microscope, really, and asking lots of questions. So it doesn't have to only exist upon a transaction. In fact, we'll come on to some of the reasons why you might want to keep it during the lifetime. But predominantly, a data room is known to exist when a business is looking to be sold and wants to give people the keys to understand their business in more detail.
When you say give the keys, so you're talking about opening your, confidential information, commercial information, contracts, financial trading history. So when you say the keys, we're talking about all of that and putting that in a vehicle that somebody else has access to.
Yes, it tends to be a folder that sits somewhere, whether that's on the cloud or on a server that you manage, and it tends to be broken down between financial, legal, and tax. There's a lot of overlap between those. In the financial, might start to go into some tax questions, and in the financial and legal, there'll definitely be some overlap. Ones that I've seen before, within the financial, there could be more of the commercial side of the contracts, looking at customer contracts, even employment contracts. But then in the legal would go more into the share capital, the shareholders, and a lot of the contracts with your suppliers and the things that you own and the assets that you've bought, etc., etc. There's lots of detail. I think that the best thing would be for us to provide an example to someone of them to look up the detail of what's typically asked for, but your business is scrutinised to the nth degree. It's an awful lot of detail that is asked, particularly if you get into the point of actually concluding on a share purchase agreement following a heads of term. And the bigger the company that's looking at you, the more scrutiny you're likely to get. A PLC is going to ask for a lot more information. And some of the frustration, unfortunately, can be that often they're using templated questionnaires as well. Now, we've had some funny moments where we've been scrolling through templates and it's clearly been built for somebody else, and the acquirers forgot to delete some silly questions that don't make any sense because it was for a specific sector. Or you do just get the generic one which covers all sectors, and you just find yourself not applicable for half the questions, which can be really frustrating. But again, I think that's a driver for having a data room almost live as well. It does require some maintenance, but it's, as you said, governance, good business hygiene. If you can have that throughout the life of the business, then it makes it so much easier. And I would argue puts you in a stronger negotiating position as well, and saves you wasting a lot of time when it comes to the crunch of a deal.
It's interesting, and I agree with that. And I think, I always think it's important that we share sort of personal stories and history on this. And, I was in a position where, having gone through the first stage of an offer and building a data room, I then looked at this and thought, well, hang on a minute, This is stuff that I probably, which is my belief now, probably should have had anyway, and we'll talk about that. Because at the minute we're very much talking about responding potentially to an approach or an acquisition opportunity, and I think I want to turn it into what the business owner can do proactively, but we'll come into that in a second. And that was because we had a secondary offer, which, as you know, often happens when, whether it's through, contacts, whether it's just through jungle drums, very often somebody else comes knocking when you're going through that process and you're close to completion or withdrawal, whichever way it is. We had a deal number one fell down for reasons that we as the potential seller chose, and somebody else came along. And actually part of the secondary offer was an opportunity with somebody wanted to make an exclusive offer, as they often do, and we were in a position to say we can accept that as long as it could complete within 4 weeks, because we're in a position then to have everything done. And that surprised, yes, it was a much larger acquirer, and it surprised that business that we had all that. And it made me think that, and the reason that really mattered, Paul, is we didn't know this at the time, but within 6 weeks of completion, the acquiring managing director of that UK-based American business had left. So I always believe that timing, that deal would never have happened had we had to go through actually building the data room rather than just presenting a data room. So I think that's a really important piece to get across with people, to understand why it's an opportunity for you. Even if you think, you may or may not sell in the future, just having it there. Let's talk about some of the things that if you were just going to have it to make sure that you are running your business, and this is where I refer to it maybe as a reference library. Let's help people understand what needs to be in that reference library for your own benefit as the owner, irrespective of anybody asking questions and wanting to look under the bonnet.
Yeah, so I think you would have the full typical list, and then you would pick and choose the things that you think are worth having live and ongoing, and then others you would say, that's for when it comes to the crunch and when you want to do it. I've had experiences like you've talked about, and we've been involved in experiences where if only the potential acquirer had known some of the information at an early stage, would have saved a whole lot of time and stress of months later them saying, you've got this issue in your business, this is not for us then. I told you that 2 or 3 months ago and wasted all the time. And the worst case scenario in that situation is you end up so desperate because you've put so much mental energy into the process. You end up trying to go ahead with the deal that's probably not right for you. So the negotiating power is so much stronger when you've got this information prepared. But to answer your question, I think live information would be, typically from a financial perspective, making sure that you've got 36 months worth of management accounts historically. Carry on beyond that by all means, but a minimum of the last 36 months that you can go back and you can see the story of the business unfolding. You can look at month by month management accounts and you can see not just the accounts themselves, but some form of narrative associated with those accounts to explain how the business has developed. You might have board meeting minutes, which might not ever get shared with an acquirer because there might be some quite sensitive information in there. But for your own governance, I think that's really important for you to reflect back and say, how well are we as a leadership team governing the business? How well are we creating the right strategic actions, and how well are we executing against those as well? Forecasts, making sure that there's always a forecast up to date for the rest of the financial year and a budget for the following financial year. So from a financial perspective, they would be some of the typical ones. But in addition, I would expect things like your commercial contract, for them to be there front and centre for everybody to look at and regularly review and make sure that they are fit for purpose, and that you check in. We've all signed contracts that we probably shouldn't have because we got excited in the moment trying to deal with a customer. Where are the risks within those customer contracts now? Obviously, your employment contracts, making sure you can put your hand on them. So they're some of the things that I can think of.
I think we could break that down again, couldn't we, Paul? So there's items there which you would have as, and again, I'm just using the word reference library. So the ones that we often see are contracts of employment. So lots of small businesses, but specifically in the sector we represent in the agency space, very often it's been started by a concept of either family and friends. So if we go back to, the great conversation with John Woodall at Space 48 at the time about it was family and friends. And as that grows, first of all, making it, we're going to be blunt, making it legal, making it commercially appropriate with contracts of employment in place. But very often as the business grows, and then you grow what we often believe is a step in the, whether we use the phrase financial maturity or in the financial confidence, is that you start to develop a management team. And very often, 5, 6, 10 years in, you look and the contract of employment's never been updated. So the person is, office manager on this salary, etc., because it's just been managed and all the way through. And that's a bad sign for lots of reasons. We start this conversation about potential sale or acquisition, but also if you had to go the other way, and we've got clients that we know we've had to help through it recently where post-COVID there's been potentially some downsizing or some pivoting of that business and some downsizing on the back of that restructuring, is that if you're looking to change somebody's contract employment, it has to be the right appropriate contract employment now, and that often gets missed. So there's lots of areas there which we could sort of say are housekeeping. So, but what I really want to then expand on is, you said some things at the start there about 36 months management accounts and about financial forecasts. One of the benefits for me, and this is where I believe owners need to look at how do they make the tools do more for them and their business, is one of the benefits of cloud computing, full stop, cloud accounting, apologies, and specifically something like the MAP offering, is that we offer those services, you said, in a folder or in a drive. So there will be, a client will have a management accounts drive. Those clients that look for forecasting, budgeting, let's start with budgeting. They might be a record of a budget. If they're a little bit more confident, there might be budgeting, forecasting. So all those drives exist. And I think very often people think that creating the data room is this large piece of work that needs to be done, when actually it's about making sure that if we use a very often internal phrase, your map folder is engineered in such a way that these things can just be links. Because very often, you and I have worked on some recently where the data has purely been a link. It's not been PDFs of 36 months of management accounts. It's a link through to the management accounts folder for that client. So I think sometimes this is about us helping the clients understand, and potentially other business owners understand, how having these tools in place, you can do a little bit more with them to make them represent more for you and your business.
Yeah, some of it, as you say, is just pulling together what you're already doing and consolidating it in one place through links or through moving folders about. But it's about then, like you say, if we're working with a client, they've already got some of those folders set up, and then it's about expanding that into other areas of the business, that maturity into other areas of the business, with some of the things that you've talked about. And I also say, like, with some of our clients who have been working together for a period of time, you might decide to start reporting on some things that are additional to what you need operationally. So there might be certain KPIs that we know that if a buyer came in, they'd want to know about. They might not really move the needle on your business operationally. You don't need to look at them month by month, but we can very easily stick them on the end of a management accounts pack so that you don't have to do it retrospectively later down the line, because it could change anyway how you have to record your data at source to make some of those KPIs possible and applicable. So there's storing, there's just recycling of existing data and information that you're producing. There's extending and enhancing some of that information, and then there's moving into other areas of the business. Most of what we're doing at MAP is about the trading performance and holding the client accountable and supporting them on their trading performance. But what a data room will do is then expand that into what are some of the risk areas of the business that you might not talk about in your monthly finance meeting or your monthly board meeting, but there's some of the things that will definitely be interesting and important to a buyer who doesn't know the ins and outs of your business. It's okay you say, no, don't worry, we've got our employment contracts in place. Well, like you say, well, what does in place mean? Are they 10 years old, or are they recent, and do they cover the latest role, and what are the restrictive covenants, and what are the notice periods? They will want to see how aligned that is or far out it is from the way that they currently operate. So a data room is about starting to think about the buyer, not just you as the seller and what you need. Use that as a starting point, but then layer on top of it all the things that a buyer would want to know as well.
I think, and whilst I totally agree with that, and say we've been through it, I'm wanting to help people understand how a data room is worthwhile having. Even if today you said, we know so many clients, Paul, that say, I have no plans to sell. And yet what we're saying here is, I think that we offer, by nature of the MAP methodology, part of the financial element of a data room build. You and I know that when we've done that, we can quite quickly provide that information, either because the client already has it produced by part of their monthly financial reporting, or the way in which very often we will have set up the reporting in the first place. We can get that even if we don't historically produce that for that particular client in their accounts pack. So I think what I'm trying to get to talk about and get people to understand is that we produce a large percentage of what goes into that already, just by being a MAP client. And it's how do you make that transition to have that a little bit better. So to put your contracts of employment in, one of the things that changed in employment law was obviously GDPR. Are your contracts GDPR compliant? Do you have a clause in there that says they are? Because if not, you need to look at it. And it's just a way of saying, use the folder structure that you've already probably got with MAP to how do you help get yourself in that better position. And it's not just, as I say, it's not just on a buyer's side. I appreciate that's where very often we get dragged in. But it's even if you're looking at, as you say, a restructure, or for me anyway, looking at restructuring, how do you have access to that data? How do you run your risk register? You've mentioned risk there, because risk should be something that you want to assess as the owner for your own benefit, not because somebody else is interested. It should be something that you're doing for yourself. And I just feel that the data room is perceived as this is something that you need when you sell your business, and not enough people realising it's a tool that they could get benefit from, even if they ran a lifestyle business for 10 years. What is the role? I suppose there's a question. What is the role of a data room in a lifestyle business?
I think you used the word reference library before, which I like. An index, I often say, it's really is an index of your whole business. And like you said, the concept of links is really useful, because you might think, well, why do I want to be putting all this stuff here when I've already got it over here? That's fine, but you've got lots of different apps and you've got lots of different folders and tech and things that you're using. So some of it can just be linking to all that and bringing it into one place. But, if you were to bring a non-exec director in, for example, they should be doing more than just looking at the finances, because you've got, hopefully, a finance professional who can do that. They should be looking at strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats across the business and asking lots of probing questions. Well, the data room provides a framework to lay all of that out, rather than it just come up in conversation and by chance, because it's what you woke up in the middle of the night thinking. You can actually work through quite maturely and seeing where are the green, amber and red spots across your business, in terms of whether you've got things in place, and if you've got it in place, is it as strong as it could be? So it'll basically help you to form an agenda of what you could and should be working on and prioritising in your business. So I use the example of working non-exec director because I've always done it, and I obviously believe in it strongly ever since I started up. If you've not got a non-exec director, I'd urge you to consider it. It doesn't matter if you're only running a lifestyle business, but even if you don't, a index, I think, for everything that's applicable and relevant in your business. Firstly, even if you're not looking to sell your business, you just never know, an opportunity might knock. We've seen, again, lots of time wasted in that, when actually some of it is just putting a big red flag up and saying, look, here, feel free to look at all the weaknesses of our business before we get into protracted negotiations. If there's anything in here that scares you don't like because it doesn't meet your metrics, then we're telling you now, rather than wasting time and telling you further down the line. So that's another reason to do it as well.
That again, personal history there, Paul. In the first agency that I sold, we were in a position where the previous owners had some PR issues. Let's say there was some some reputational issues, and large PLC came knocking on the door, and specifically one of the chief exec of that PLC basically said, what's all this about, and sort of very dramatically threw these press clippings, although they were print digitally, literally press clippings at me before my time, and we got through it all. And there was again a reason why from my side that I didn't want that deal to happen, but I took that lesson, because what I did appreciate there was the person saying, look, first thing, you need to keep that. They called it a SH1T file, but you need to keep that because someone else asked those questions and you need to be able to deal with it. And that made me realise that, again, as I say, it's just something that's appropriate and apparent for your business.
Yeah, and definitely this is not about a sales tool. It's not about glossing over your business and making it sound amazing for a sales pitch. This is about revealing the reality of the business, and you'll take a judgment on some of it and say, that's a risk that we're willing to take because this customer is spending a lot of money on us. So the fact that we've got client concentration issue, we're comfortable with that, or not. These notice periods that we've got for these employees, yeah, that is a risk and I need to confront it. But I think basically what I would say is that it accelerates the dealing with problems before they become too big, because you're visualizing them, you're seeing them, and you're able to address them at an early stage before you think, oh, I wish I'd sorted that out sooner. sooner point. And I think I've said it in before. I think that's what the best business owners do. They're not looking to show off all the great things that they're doing. They're looking to dig and find the weaknesses and the risk areas in their business all the time.
The obvious one there, Paul, and again, I'm going to bring it back to, and it doesn't matter whether it's what we describe as a lifestyle business or a capital business, is that how many times do we have the conversation where somebody says, that's Fred's department, that's Daphne's department, they've got all that information, or they've got all that. And very often in agencies, it's the person doing the operations, are the processes written down? Oh, that's in their head. Now that, as I say, if there's nothing to do with ever selling a business, you want to own that business for the rest of your life, there is a risk to you as the owner not having that information documented and available to you. I've seen it in the past where there's some wonderful documentations, and I know internally we'll use the phrase playbooks. But if you don't know how to access them and you don't know readily where they are, that's a risk to you as the owner. So I think sometimes it's about understanding that point of risk. Go through your people, your processes, your prices, all the usual things, and make sure it's all there. If the only person who ever views it is you, and then what you're saying is the best way to use it is have something that you would be happy to throw the keys to the data vault, the data room, whatever people recognise as the identity, open to a third party. And I think that's what I really want to get people to understand. And how do I maybe have what I've got now? How do I make my map folder become a stronger piece for me as the business owner? That's probably the way I'd like to try and phrase it.
Yeah, and as you say, anyone who's currently working with us is already halfway there. They've already got a lot of the ingredients already in place.
Let's flip it the other way, Paul. Somebody's not working with us, they don't have that. Talk to me about, I know that we run the financial health checks and the zero health checks, and how would we be able to do that? I'm going to use the phrase mini due diligence because I don't want to confuse it and I don't want to over-egg it, but how could we look at somebody's records and say, this is how you could bring it up to a MAP standard or our methodology? Let's not say standard in case it sounds more judgmental, but here's a methodology, how you can bring it to this, and then this is what you could do with it. So if somebody wanted to look at potentially building a data room that were not already a client of MAP's, help them understand how that could be done.
So we operate within the G Suite, so the Google suite of products. So when a new client signs up with us, we set up a Google Drive folder. Regardless of what system they're working on, many of them would be working on Microsoft, for example, we set up a Google Drive folder because, as you said before, we can still provide shortcuts to where internal documents sit within that client's business. But the suite that we use is predominantly around the Google suites. Then when we create documents within Google Sheets, Docs, etc., we can slot them perfectly in that Google Drive and then have shortcuts to non-Google Drive documents. So the folder structure that we set up would basically revolve around our methodology, which is how to run an outsourced finance function. So it would include all of the services that we provide, and all of the functions of a finance function would be laid out within there. If our client then decides to take on board meetings, for example, as a service, then that would go in there as well. So we would get them to a level where everything that we're doing is laid out within Google Drive folders. And that is not just the outputs, by the way, in terms of your management accounts. We also document the client playbook so that they are not wedded to us or any individual that works the MAP. They can actually see how certain parts of the service are delivered, and it's documented because that becomes an asset for them in their business. So we would get to that stage and get them financially mature, and then in order to get them business mature and provide the wider data room, we would then help to provide an index of what a good data room looks like, and then talk about who's going to provide what. I think that's really important. Obviously, we've been through due diligence processes before with clients, and what we recognised is that the legal due diligence, actually, we're already managing a load of those aspects because there's an overlap between legal and finance. So a lot of the documents that a solicitor might charge a lot of money for either producing or putting in a folder, we've already got that. We can manage that. It doesn't need a legal expert. And then you bring the solicitor in for the bits that are, the technical, more complex aspects to then add afterwards. So yeah, in summary, we'd build out the Google Drive file storage based on the way that we normally do from a financial maturity perspective. Then we would provide a due diligence reference library, like you said, an index of all the things that could go in there, and then we'd have a discussion about where do those documents already exist, and then finally what doesn't exist and what do we need to start prioritising, building.
I think what that also should get people to maybe resonate with, Paul, is that we spoke at the start about you reacting to someone else, and I've seen it, you've seen it, where somebody sends a 87 tab Excel driven sheet through, and as you say, it's a standard template that's either theirs or even they take them somewhere else, and you end up spending so much time then debating what's in and out, where actually, and again in my experience, and we've seen it with where we've done it with MAP clients, where the potential acquirer actually says, oh, I didn't realise you'd have this, that's fine, we can use that, because actually all I'm giving you is this. And most times, 9 times out of 10, as you say, the buyer knows that, you know, they've got an historic way of doing something, and a lot of what they ask for may be inappropriate for that specific deal. I also think, and this is probably a little bit more curveball, but I always believe, we had an interesting conversation recently with Robert Craven at Guider in the map room, and Robert was talking about the difference between the business owner and the agency owner, and how the agency owner will focus on the work, the output, the craft, as we would call it, and the business owner looks at all these things. How do I use the phrase there, which is, how do I make this governance activity into an asset for my business? How do I make it do something for me, for my life as the owner? And wouldn't it be wonderful if it then did something for someone else, if that's your ambition? And I think it's interesting that what we're talking about there, and this maybe you can talk a little bit more about your concept of financial confidence. This is about having a framework to use financial information, but then maybe see where other elements of your ownership hat, and you talk very often, and you have spoken about wearing a shareholder hat and wearing the operator hat, and this is about trying to maybe marry those two worlds together a bit better.
Yeah, and I know you didn't want to just make this about selling a business, but I think sometimes people can be quite intimidated maybe by some of the questions that come back, and quite embarrassed about some of the things that's not in place. So, you know, who is your managing director? Me. Who's your operation director? Me. Who's your delivery director? Me. But actually, I think the level below that they're really looking to unpick is the processes that underpin it. So you're not going to go and hire a load of people just for the sake of being able to sell your business for someone else's benefit, because they might have people that are going to fulfill that role anyway. But what they would love to see and acquire, and what they're actually looking for, is how is that role carried out? Doesn't matter that it's you, that's fine. If you've taken the time, as you said before, to write the standard operating procedure or the playbook about how the tasks are carried out under each of those roles, that's the realistic step towards your business being acquirable by someone else. It's that, okay, you might have your fingers in a lot of pies and wearing a lot of hats, but have you at least documented the way that you deliver those roles so that it can be handed over to somebody else? And that is what helps your business be more resilient from you, and helps you with your earn-out negotiations and everything else, because even though you're the one doing all those roles, pulling all those strings, you've got handover ready to pass to someone else to carry on the baton.
It's also a key obstacle and an opportunity for growth, isn't it? If you're looking to scale your business, and we see this very often, that there's reasons why agencies get to a certain size, tend to see it between the $1 million to $1.5 million revenue, and you tend to see it around the 10 to 12 people. And we know we've had Daniel talking about the lifestyle business, or go, if you're not going to get your 12th or 13th person, you need 50. But it's also about the ability to, if you then recruit, let's talk about how many clients do we speak to who say they're looking to consider either permanent or fractional operational person. And you say, okay, what's the job description? What's the work you're going to do? Because it's part of what they do. So as the agency owner, they basically do all the work at the minute, and they wear these many, many hats. I think the other thing here, Paul, is what you're talking about there is very often as you start that business, and you've gone through this growth yourself with MAP, you start off wearing all those different hats: commercial, I'm operational, I'm people, etc., etc. And as the business grows, you bring people in. How many times do we speak to owners who will cite a reason or an obstacle for growth is getting somebody in to do this part of the work I do? You said there, I am the MD, I am the delivery director, I am the whatever. Very often in the agency space, the commercial and delivery are very often mixed in that space. And one of the best examples I ever saw, I wish it had been me, it wasn't me, but I took it after that. One of the best examples I saw was a business owner who actually had a brilliantly documented system of job descriptions. And on 3 job descriptions was that person's name. It happened to be a lady. This female wrote her name, and part of her plan was, when do I take my name off that and give it to somebody else? Because it was that, how do I get to the point where I'm spinning so many plates, I've got to give something up to grow my business. And ironically, in this particular instance, this person didn't want to be the MD, as often the case. They wanted to go down the more creative route. How do I know when it's time to invest in a management team, and how do I pass that along? So it was very easy then to say, this is the MD's role, these are the processes. It actually happened to link to, even, believe it or not, running into their financial reviews, etc., etc. It was all the things that the person in that business didn't want to have to do, they didn't like doing it, but recognised they had to for a period of growth. But to grow that business properly would bring other people in. So that's another thing that I would say to people. Understand, or look at a data room and go, how can I use that to help me map this business out and the life of this business and the growth journey of this business better? And as you say, look at it with the shareholder's hat on, whether that's you as the shareholder or the third party we're talking about. Or how do I look at that and take myself out the day-to-day piece? I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it also.
I love that process. I've got a little thing that I work through when I'm looking at the responsibilities that I have and the tasks that I have, and I go through this hierarchy to say, first of all, can I eradicate it? Before I look to do the next 2 things, is this a thing that's adding value to the business, or have I just done what I've always done? Can I eradicate this task or this responsibility? If I can't eradicate it, because it's important, can I automate it? Which obviously these days is becoming more and more accessible. Does a human need to do this, or can I automate it? If I can't automate it, can I delegate it? So before I come on to the 4th one, which unfortunately doesn't end with 8 like the first 3, which will annoy you, is there somebody already in the business that is more appropriate to take on this task? Which 95% of the time should be yes, because it shouldn't be you as the business owner. There should be someone else.
You could say appropriate. You could appropriate it to someone.
Yeah, but then the final one is hire. So only once you've gone through that 3-stage process should you then be looking to hire someone. Because actually what you might find is that there's these disparate tasks that you're doing, when you go through that 3-part process, can actually be dealt with through eradicating, automating and delegating through the business before you go and hire somebody. But then if you find that there's a list big enough to justify a role for somebody, then you're very clear of what that role is and what they're going to be doing.
Interesting. So I think what we're saying there is the data room tends to be associated with due diligence, and due diligence tends to be associated with a transaction. And we have some fantastic lifestyle clients who will sit with us and say, I have no plans today to sell my business. So what we're saying here in reflection is that may change, and wouldn't it be great today if you had a tool running alongside as the lifestyle business that allowed you to better manage that business, better manage your risk and all those things, even if it's just for your own benefit. If that could then be turned open to a third party, wouldn't that be useful? Because it will save you time, effort, heartache and money later on. Or the other side of it is, how do I use it as a tool to grow my business? How do I look at it as, because we often say this, and I don't think we communicate it very well, which is every decision the owner takes, they take as an investment decision. Do I bring this person in? Do I sign this office lease? Do I do A, B, C? And very often it would be sitting there and looking at, against that data room, does that change anything? Does that increase or mitigate a risk? And it's all those reasons why it's something that, having gone through it and having gone through the heartache of not having access to all the detail and all the rest of it, that's something now that I think I often talk about governance and maybe don't communicate. It comes from governance is an opportunity for you as the business owner to have a less stressful time in ownership of your business. That's probably the last thing I'd like to maybe say on that, but that's an interesting point.
I'd say identify and fix gaps is the way that I would see it, rather than wait till you get punched in the face. How can you prepare in advance and mitigate those risks so that it doesn't become such a magnified problem later down the line?
Yeah, and also, we know of people who use that process internally as well. So we know people who will say, "I'm running this process. I'm running almost we've often called it under the bonnet, but I'm running a due diligence process internally because the people doing the processes know the risks and the faults. It's not airing the dirty washing in public. Then it's doing it privately. But that's interesting. So I'm assuming if this resonates with people and they want to understand how they can use any part of a basic, a middle, or an advanced data room for their business, how do they get in touch with us?
Yeah, so like you say, whether it's an existing client or not a client, it's a different process, but we can have the conversation about how it works and explain how that works. But just reach out to me, reach out on my email, paul@wearemap.co.uk, or find me on LinkedIn.